Yeah, hi peeps, it's Tersse back in the old squat box once again, and this is another bringing of UK politics. So I'm going to bring you a clip of Sunday Politics, which is a show that I often watch and enjoy. They cover quite a lot in this topic. They cover the austerity in the UK. They cover a new bill that's being proposed for controlling the press without trying to infringe upon the freedom of the press, but to make sure that they don't walk all over the British citizens with their phone tapping and printing stories which are obviously made up and fake but get good headlines and therefore sell papers, without being able to be held to account for breaking their ethics, and printing stories just for making profit, and then when they're caught lying and they have to print a retraction or an apology, although it was a front page story, they stick it in page 27, small 2-line apology for what they did last week or last month or 3 months ago, so that's coming up tomorrow. I think the vote is Monday. They're going to be voting on whether or in which way they're going to try and enforce some sort of ethics upon the UK press, And there's a piece about the EU bailout for Cyprus, the island of Cyprus, and the fact that in order to pay for it, I think Germany has demanded that the Cypriot banks place a tax upon all monies that is held by the bank by the population. So basically, if you happen to have a bank account in Cyprus, if you own 100,000 euros or more, you're going to be taxed 10% of that to pay for this EU bailout. If you own under 100,000, they're going to tax you 6.72% of your whatever you've got held in the bank, saved in the bank. Which to me is like fucking crazy. But then again, I mean, if America had said, when they bailed the banks out after the 2007-2008 debacle of the American economy, if they'd have said, in order to bail the banks out with $800 billion, each bank's going to have to levy a tax of 6.72% on bank savings under 100,000 and 10% on bank savings over 100,000. Can you imagine what the American people would have said? They'd have said, fuck that, don't bail the banks out, let them fucking die, you know what I mean? And that might have been a better thing for America. And now there's a run on the banks in Cyprus. People are taking their money out. They're scrambling over the weekend, at the cash machines every 24 hours, taking out as much as they can of their money to make sure that whatever's in there is, it's not going to be as much as would be there if they didn't take the money out. And this could be, a problem for Cyprus. I mean, they haven't ratified this fully either. So even though they've got a bank holiday tomorrow, and Tuesday, that's the first day that the bank's open in Cyprus, some people may go in there before it's actually ratified and they can tax their money and just withdraw every penny from their bank account. And if that happens, then there won't be any money in the bank for them to tax. And Germany, although they demanded this, may find that the money to pay for the, was it 9 billion? I don't think they were given a lot of money. It's about 9 billion euros, That's not a lot for, a lot of bailout, considering the money that was given to Spain and Ireland, 50, 60 billion, you know what I mean? I mean, 9 billion is nothing. Why did Germany demand that this was done in Cyprus, but didn't demand it for Spain or Ireland or Greece? It beggars belief. And it just shows you that, as austerity measures aren't working in Europe, the Conservatives in Europe are demanding more and more blood from the actual people. You know what I mean? And some, I don't know, foisty and fucking packed with the bankers and the corporations to basically damage people, damage the citizens that elect them, And this is what I see in America. I think that's what the Republicans are doing. They've got a Faustian pact with the corporations and big business and the lobbyists to basically damage the social integrity of America for some reason. It's like a demand of a pound of flesh, or a pint of blood from every fucking man, woman and child in America in order for them to cast a vote in the House or Senate that might make any fucking sense to anybody. Anyway, I want you to watch this little. I won't ramble on too much. I want you to watch this little bit of video about British and European politics. Hope you enjoy it, man, and as long as you got.
In a moment, we'll look ahead to the big stories that will dominate politics next week, and there's a lot of them. But first, the news with Maxime Mawhinney.
Good afternoon. The Chancellor has said that he is not planning on changing his formula for cutting the deficit ahead of next week's budget. George Osborne argued that dropping his plans to tackle the deficit would leave the UK facing economic disaster. But the Shadow Chancellor Ed Balls argued that continuing with the same policies would represent the economics of the lunatic farm. This report from Adam Fleming.
Ahead of the budget, the Chancellor is clearly appealing to the grey vote. George Osborne has announced that a cap on the costs of adult social care and a new style state pension will be introduced earlier than planned, in 2016. But he wouldn't talk about reports that he'll inject billions of pounds into new housing, and he's sticking to his strategy for bringing down the deficit.
But there is no easy answer to Britain's problems. There's no miracle cure, because of course if there was a miracle cure it would have been deployed. It's just a lot of hard work of dealing with Britain's debts, helping businesses create jobs, helping families who want to work hard and get on.
His Labour opponent Ed Balls says the government's plans are doing quite the opposite.
George Osborne said, I'll secure the recovery, we had a double-dip recession. He said, I'll get the borrowing down, it's going up. He said, I'll secure the AAA rating, we've now lost it. The only reason why they won't now change course is to avoid their own political humiliation.
The Chancellor is also taking heat from his own side, including demands for tax cuts and more spending cuts, in the battle over what to do about the economy and the run-up to the budget on Wednesday. Adam Fleming, BBC News.
Speaking on the MAR programme, the Chancellor also confirmed that the government will compensate military personnel in Cyprus if they're affected by a new bank tax imposed as part of a bailout for the island. The Cypriot government is planning to introduce a levy of up to 10% on all savings accounts in the country. It's part of a deal to secure funds from the European Union and the International Monetary Fund. Political leaders are seeking to rally support for their rival plans on press regulation in England and Wales ahead of a Commons vote tomorrow. But actor Hugh Grant, who fronts the Hacked Off campaign, said Mr Cameron faced defeat because he's on the wrong side of this. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have been attending the St Patrick's Day parade for 1st Battalion Irish Guards in Aldershot. Kate followed the tradition where a senior female member of the royal family presents sprigs of shamrocks to officers and guardsmen at the event at their barracks. That's all the news for now. There'll be more here on BBC One at 6:05. Now back to Andrew.
Thanks, Maxine. Now, a showdown over press regulation tomorrow. Budget day on Wednesday, a possible run on the banks in Cyprus as the euro crisis returns to the front page. Yep, it's a bumper edition of the week ahead. Now, the budget on Wednesday is taking place to a backdrop of speculation about the Tory leadership. We saw our interview there with Mr. Freer. So let's just have a look at how David Cameron can be seen to be counteracting this. This is from the party political broadcast.
You're not Prime Minister to be the good guy or the bad guy, to be the popular guy or the friendly guy. You're there to be the guy that gets the job done, and that's what people want you to do. It's so vital that you look to the horizon and not tomorrow's headlines, because there's a sort of daily battle out there in politics of this story and that event and this. It's all rubbish. What matters is, are you taking the right long-term decisions for the good of the country? Are you helping people to make the most of their lives, to get on, to achieve their dreams? That's what matters.
Isabella sounds a bit frustrated there, does he not, about all this leadership speculation? He's the man getting... the family guy was the only thing he missed out. He's the guy getting on with the job, although these people are sniping from the sidelines.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a bit vanilla, that broadcast. But I think that frustration lies behind the sort of big symbolic thing he did this week, which was stop those cross-party talks on Leveson. I think it was very much Cameron trying to show himself as the man in charge, the leader who's ready to take difficult and controversial decisions.
I think the fact that the broadcast was just a monologue by David Cameron was itself a message to the backbenchers. I am your party's ultimate asset. Look at all the polls. I outpoll you. I outpoll the party brand. Getting rid of me would be madness. So I thought the medium was the message in this case.
You know, it's all the fault of this programme. I sat in this very seat last Sunday and explained the thinking behind Theresa May, which is that she hopes and expects the Prime Minister will win, but she's a realist and that's why she's positioning herself. I wrote a version of that in The Guardian the next day, and it was that prompted Michael Gove to really go for Theresa May in that political cabinet meeting. He was infuriated by the use of the word "she's a realist," and that's what took us into, not a great week for the Prime Minister, and not a great performance at Prime Minister's questions that I think we might be talking about. But I mean, Isabel is saying that the Prime Minister decided to pull the plug on those talks to show some leadership. Yes, but this is the Prime Minister who got 37% of the vote at the last election. He does not command a majority in the House of Commons, and therefore it's very difficult for him to do the "I'm the big man doing leadership." And it's very interesting, very different tone from George Osborne about that on the Mars show this morning, talking about we may find an agreement.
And what did you make of Mr. Refria?
I think
Tory leader?
Well, I think he's been an MP for coming up to 8 years.
2005.
And you'd assume that after 8 years, if you had leadership ambitions, you'd perform maybe more confidently than he did. I think that the obvious mistake he made was not committing to David Cameron remaining leader at least until 2015.
Because what's he got to lose?
Precisely, and even Theresa May was coming for a lot of criticism, as Nick Watt has just alluded to. Even she has ruled out the idea that she'd make any kind of move before 2015. It's all about positioning herself after the election.
So maybe he's got his eye on before the election. I mean, it's not often you interview just a backbench MP who's never held government position who begins an answer, my vision for Britain.
Well, and also he mentioned my team. Now, how many backbench MPs have a team? I was disappointed that he wasn't more upfront about his leadership ambitions. We all know that he's ready to throw his hat into the ring. And
That was clear from the non-answers.
But I think he should have just been open about that. I think people would have found that refreshing. I think absolutely his best political asset is his life story. This is a man who's come from absolutely nothing. He's made a multi-million-pound fortune. He now has it all. So his story about aspiration is a really compelling one, and I think he needs to start to get that across.
Now, the events in Cyprus, small island, big events, under European Union ambit, going into people's bank accounts, dipping in to take money out as part of the bailout. Now, I would suggest that in British terms, Mr. Osborne's quite lucky, because he's not got many cards to play in this budget on Wednesday, but he's now got one card, which is, look what happens if you don't cut the deficit. Look, they even end up, people's bank accounts are in danger. That rhetoric we'll hear.
And he was making that very point this morning, and also able to take some action. It's not going to cost the British taxpayer a lot of money, but some serious action, which is that Cypriot banks based in the United Kingdom will not be affected. And more significantly, British service personnel and British civil servants in Cyprus, we have a big military base there, their funds will be protected. But it's interesting, we've heard a lot of talk during this Euro crisis the last 3 years of haircuts. What does haircuts mean? It means that people we don't ever see on the bond markets or whatever, they suffer. This is a real haircut for real people. If you've got over 100,000 euros, you lose 10%. If you've got under 100,000 euros, you lose 6.78%.
Just take it out of your bank account.
Absolutely. And that was, I think, what Germany demanded in order to cough up for this 10 billion euro bailout.
Euro crisis back on the front page.
Well, this incident is a microcosm of the whole Euro crisis in that it's good short-term political news for George Osborne, provides him with an excuse, but it's bad medium to long-term economic news for him, because it makes it impossible for this country to grow. And the most alarming thing is that the Dutch finance minister has declined to rule out that this kind of intervention could be made in other Eurozone countries. And if that leads to a bank run in Spain or Italy or Portugal or elsewhere,
Going to be fascinating to watch. Now, Leveson, we talked with Harriet Harman and Simon Hughes about some of the arguments. I should point out, too, that we did try to get a Conservative on. Indeed, we tried to get Maria Miller on, who was the Culture Secretary and meant to be spearheading this. We couldn't get anybody. They weren't prepared to make an official spokesperson available on Leveson for this programme.
Well, I'm actually not surprised about that, because I think there is a great deal of confusion about what the latest position is. I mean, at the Sunday Times yesterday, I had multiple conversations with different people in Number 10, different Tories, and they weren't able to answer some of the simple questions we were asking about. What does this actually mean? What are you proposing now? I think there is a desperate desire in Number 10 to get some kind of deal, because they know the numbers don't stack up for Cameron's position and that he will be defeated. So they are trying to inch towards a deal, but it doesn't seem that we're anywhere near there yet.
I get the impression that George Osborne, reluctantly and surprisingly, is having to sort of take himself slightly off the budget with a few days to go to try and sort this out. I think there was a show of machismo from the Prime Minister a few days ago where he thought, I will just lay this down and let's see how it goes, and this is what I think. I'm willing to stand on the side of the press. And I think what they've now realised is you have to do press reform just as you have to do constitutional reform by consensus, because their proposal lies in a royal charter. A royal charter is a matter for the Privy Council. Who's head of the Privy Council in the Cabinet? It's Nick Clegg, and it would be very, very difficult, even if the Conservatives, even if they won their vote tomorrow, it would be very difficult for them to do anything without consensus.
What's the damage to the coalition? I mean, here you've got the Conservatives' coalition partner in Mr. Miliband's office, I'm told, helping to draft an alternative to the Conservative policy. And that Mr. Clegg and Mr. Cameron did have a rather irascible conversation.
Yeah, Nick Clegg described it as scratchy, which I think is a
full-blown row.
Yeah, a euphemism for something approaching violence almost. But my guess is that it's survivable, but still probably as bad a schism as there's been in the coalition over the past 3 years. I'm in two minds about the politics of this. On the one hand, it's bad for David Cameron if he loses the vote, because it reminds people that actually he's quite a vulnerable Prime Minister, doesn't command a majority on his own. On the other hand, he has one consolation, which is that I think the public have more or less lost interest. They cared about the victims, they cared about news of the world when it closed
I think
down.
that's why Labour would like to bring closure as well. There's less traction than there was.
And I think they cared about all of that, but when it comes down to the theology of whether to go for legislation or a royal charter, I think a lot of them do tune out. So David Cameron, I think, will be damaged a little bit this week, but the damage will be limited by the fact that very few people are listening.
Let them. That's the key political question of the day. Just very briefly before I want to move on to Ed Miliband. Is it not possible that if Labour and the Lib Dems hold out for their version of this Royal Charter, that a number of the major papers would just say, we are not joining this. We'll take our risks when it comes to exemplary damages?
Well, there were certainly hints of that yesterday. I know a number of the newspaper groups are already thinking about possible alternative systems, and we know that the editor of The Spectator has said he's going to have nothing to do with any of it. In fact, he claims that he's ready to go to prison to defy this.
Well, I hope you're baking a cake for him.
We'll be taking food passes.
Ready to go and visit him.
All right, look, we're talking about leadership earlier. One person's leadership, which has often been under question, it isn't really under question these days very much at all. Let's just have a look at this.
Mr. Speaker, in the light of his U-turn on alcohol pricing, can the Prime Minister tell us, is there anything he could organise in a brewery?
I would like to organise in the brewery in my constituency a party to which he would be very welcome to celebrate that the Shadow Chancellor should stay for a very long time on the front bench.
Weak answer. He never really recovered from that. Have the commentariat, of which I regard you as three exemplars, have they been underestimating Mr. E. Miliband?
Well, I think his parliamentary performances have actually been good for a long time now, maybe a year or 18 months of pretty consistent
better
showings at PMQs. The deeper question is not, is he a plausible leader of the opposition? It's, is he a plausible Prime Minister in waiting?
Well, he's been ahead in the polls for quite a while now.
Well, on some of the deeper poll questions as to who you could imagine on the doorstep of number 10, the improvement hasn't been so great.
You still think that is a negative, the kind of the Neil Kinnock question?
I think it is, and I think it's also the basis of the entirety of number 10 strategy for the next election, which is that a side-by-side comparison of David Cameron and Ed Miliband favours the Prime Minister. I also would say that policy remains quite an ambiguous thing for the Labour Party at the moment, and that blank page is needs to be
It's
filled in.
really foolish to underestimate Ed Miliband. He's a very, very tough guy. He may appear quite friendly, but he's a very, very tough guy. But, he's got a government, a cabinet, where you have the Home Secretary positioning herself. You've got people, Conservatives out there, MPs out there, calling for the Prime Minister to go. That's not a bad hand to be playing.
No one's positioning themselves against Mr. Miliband, are they?
Not at the moment, but it all comes down to the economy, and there's a very interesting poll in Isabel's paper this morning that shows that the Labour ideas for the economy are supported by 11% of the electorate.
I mean, I think the key question is what Ed Miliband does with Ed Balls. And there was this, extraordinary polling that shows that Ed Balls is quite a liability still. And what the Tories really fear is if Ed Balls is replaced with Alistair Darling, and then, all bets are off, I think they feel.
That's the Tory nightmare, is it?
It is, absolutely.
That's why the Prime Minister said he's happy to keep Mr. Balls there.
Absolutely.
Because the last thing he wants is Mr. Darling.
Although it would be very difficult how Alistair Darling would oppose George Osborne, because George Osborne is currently implementing his deficit reduction plan.
Actually, George Osborne's a little bit more fiscally profligate than Alistair Darling. Anyway, we got to go. That's it. And that's it for this week. The Daily Politics on BBC 2, lunchtime tomorrow, and it will be throughout the week. It's going to be a busy week, so don't miss it. And we'll be back, same time, same place, next weekend. Remember, if it's Sunday, it's the Sunday Politics.